Hello and welcome to the agenda here on the Blood Red YouTube channel with me, Kai Delaney, and I'm joined by Matt Addison. Matt, how are you?
Yeah, all good. Thank you, mate. All good. It's my first day back as we're recording this after a week off, so it's not been the busiest week for you guys, but yeah, plenty to get stuck into nonetheless.
Well, straight back into it. And on your first day back, there have been rumours of linking Liverpool with a transfer for Kingsley Coman of Bayern Munich. So let's get straight into that then. So on the face of it, Matt, you're looking at a 25-year-old left winger, right-footed, similar to Mane in that respect, I guess. He's won the league in every season of his professional career, obviously with spells at Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich currently, and Juventus before that. Winning goal in the Champions League final in August 2020. So on the face of it, he looks a fantastic player.
Yeah, there's no doubt he is a fantastic player, and you can kind of see why the likes of Liverpool, City, United, Chelsea, why they might be linked with him, because obviously there is that quality. It's proven, but he's still young enough that he's still got probably the best years of his career ahead of him. Which, as you say, he's won so many trophies. 24, I think it is in total in his career so far. You'd imagine, obviously that's largely because he's played for Bayern, Juventus, and PSG. But he does tick, I think, a lot of boxes for Liverpool. There's a lot of boxes as well that I'm sure we'll come on to that he doesn't tick. I would be surprised if this one happened, not least because of that price tag. But I think in terms of the quality of the player, the position he plays in, he can play left or can play on the right as well. I think it does make a little bit of sense in as much as he is a very, very good player. And obviously, to play for Liverpool, you have to be a very, very good player. But I think there's a few boxes that still need to be ticked before I can be fully convinced on this one, I think.
One of those boxes, no doubt, is going to be the transfer fee. So reports from Germany suggesting that Liverpool were perhaps looking at a bid of around 35 million euros. Yesterday, that same report suggested that 50 million euros was the asking price. Today, we've seen one saying 100 million. I mean, Liverpool aren't going to be paying that. I'm not sure if anyone would be paying 100 million euros for Coman. He's got 2 years left on his contract, but I mean, realistically, what do you see that fee being? What do you think Liverpool would go up to in theory? How does that sit for you?
I mean, my sort of instinct would be that 50 would be slightly too cheap. I think he's obviously a really good footballer. He's proven he's at a good age, as we've said. There's a lot going for him. And even with 2 years left on his contract, I think if it was 1 year, obviously, then it becomes a sort of Thiago Alcantara situation where Liverpool look at it and think that they can get the player for much cheaper. They paid, I think, 25 million or so for him last summer. And that was because obviously he had a year left on his contract. Bayern didn't want to let that happen. So maybe if it was next summer and he did have 12 months left, maybe you'd be looking at that sort of cut price fee. As you say, it was rumoured that Liverpool had made a bid of around 30 or 35 million euros. Maybe at that price, it would have been sort of sensible with a year left. But I think with two, you're probably looking at sort of double that. I think 60, 70 million euros, that would kind of make a little bit of sense to me in terms of someone coming in to buy him. I mean, I think the fact that Bayern Munich seem to be saying that they want 100 is kind of an admission, really, that they don't really want to sell him. I think in an ideal world, they would extend his contract, and that seemingly is sort of on the wage packet that he's sort of demanding. That the reason that he hasn't signed so far is that he potentially would want to be on a little bit more money than Bayern would be prepared to pay. But again, that kind of feeds into this idea that maybe he's not then going to sign for Liverpool, because I think Bayern certainly would pay bigger wages than what Liverpool would. And you have to sort of put him into that pecking order you mentioned before. He's sort of similar in terms of position and probably in terms of quality as well, when both are at their best to Sadio Mane. But obviously you can't have both players on the pitch really at the same time, certainly not in that same position. So I think if Coman was coming in as a player who's not necessarily in Liverpool's best 11, to sort of pay anywhere near 100 million would sort of be bizarre, really, for them. It would never have happened before. Obviously, they have spent big on Addison and Van Dijk, but they are sort of transformational players, as we call them, the ones that you just can't really get anybody else to have that same impact. I don't think that's the same with Kingsley Coman and the wages as well. Liverpool do pay big wages for big players, Mohamed Salah, Van Dijk, all of those sorts of players. But I think Coman would be on at least as much as them, if not slightly more. And it just doesn't seem to me to fit into that sort of model of the way that Liverpool do things, really.
No, it's a good point, and you mentioned Liverpool's model there. I mean, the last forward signing Liverpool had was Diogo Jota last summer. Again, very similar position to Coman, kind of playing primarily on that left-hand side, but can operate anywhere across the front three. It would be a dramatic shift away from that, wouldn't it? You look at Jota and a lot of Liverpool signings in the last few years, the likes of Wijnaldum, Shaqiri, even Van Dijk was a big fee, but coming up from a Southampton kind of level. I know Thiago came in last year from Bayern Munich, and this would maybe be a similar fee in terms of the profile. Sorry, not a fee, but a similar profile of the player. Um, but it's not something that Liverpool do a lot, is it? Going out there and taking a top player kind of in his peak years or approaching his peak years from another European giant.
No, I think Liverpool have to sign another forward player to come in this summer, but I don't think it will be, as you say, one of those types of players. I think it will be more akin to the Diogo Jota deal in the sense that not just the sort of experience, but the cost, the fact that he can play in all three positions. Okay, Coman can do that, but he does tend to favour coming off that left hand side, and as you say, Liverpool have already got those sorts of options. So I think it's one of those where it would go against what Liverpool have done so successfully. I think you could absolutely see Coman going to Chelsea or to Manchester United or a team like that because they have that history of spending that sort of money. I think that the amount of money it would take for Liverpool to get him, it just doesn't quite fit for me. I don't think Liverpool would look to spend that sort of money, even if they got rid of three or four sort of fringe players. You think if they can get what they want for Shaqiri, which is about 13 or so million, if they could get what they want for Divock Origi, he will leave. But even if they brought in, say, 70, 80 million pounds in player sales, I don't think that would be invested as one player in one big sum to bring somebody like this in. I think it would be, very much a case of trying to find another Jota, another player to develop, not least, I think, because it just makes it that much easier for that player to integrate, to come in. It's not an expectation. Certainly it wasn't when Jota came in last summer that he had to play every single match. It was a case of, well, long term, that will become your role. You will become one of the front three. But for now, it's a case of introducing you to the way that Liverpool play and that sort of thing. So I think it's got to be a gradual thing. Liverpool, whoever they get, will be looking at someone who has the potential to be one of the front three, but isn't necessarily one of those front three right now. And I think if you're Kingsley Coman and you're coming to Liverpool for a huge amount of money, if it is 100 million, whatever it is, I think it would be significantly more than what Liverpool have paid for pretty much all of their attacking players. I think if you are coming in for that sort of money on those sorts of wages, as we've said before, with the trophies and the sort of proven record that he has, I think he'd have to come in and be a guaranteed starter week in, week out. And I just don't think, unless Liverpool were to lose one of the front three, which I don't think will happen either, I just don't think that would happen. I think he would come in as a player who would sort of come in and battle Jota really to be one of those two players to come into the lineup. And I just don't see that Liverpool would spend that sort of money. Manchester City, maybe. Manchester United, maybe. Chelsea, maybe. But Liverpool, I just don't see that happening really for what would be, to begin with at least, kind of a squad player. Maybe is putting it a little bit too strongly, but certainly not one who would be an absolute guarantee, I don't think.
Having said that, if you are Coman and the move could happen for in the region of somewhere to 40, 50 million and maybe not the kind of 90, 100 million that reports have suggested yesterday. If you're Coman and you're maybe going to be leaving Bayern Munich, Liverpool's still going to be an attractive destination for you, isn't he? Obviously with Klopp in charge, and when he would get his chance in the team, he'd be playing with the likes of Salah, Mane, Firmino, possibly Thiago, who of course he'll know very well. So from Coman's point of view, it would perhaps be a move that he would be interested in, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you can sort of see really for any player in the world to come to Liverpool and what that means to come to the Premier League, Jurgen Klopp, all the rest of it. I think it's a hugely attractive place, and I should say, of course, obviously him coming to Liverpool would mean that he wasn't necessarily a guaranteed starter. Well, he's not necessarily at Bayern Munich either. I think we should point that out. I mean, there's plenty of competition for places when you think of Leroy Sané and players like that over in Germany for Bayern. So there is, I think, from the player's perspective, a sort of appeal to it. I think the issue really for me is not that Kingsley Coman wouldn't fancy it. It's more that Liverpool wouldn't pay that sort of money to bring him in, and maybe would look for a different type of player as well. I think, obviously, for Liverpool, it's very much a balance. We know that Jurgen Klopp likes a much smaller squad. The squad harmony is a huge thing. I think if you're bringing in a player of this quality, it kind of, okay, if it could be done for cheaper, if the transfer fee, the wages were right, everything was right, maybe there's a situation where that could happen. But I just think there's probably a few more likely players that things could sort of fall into place for, if you like, for Liverpool in the summer. I think it's more likely, I think, to be a player that's maybe a little bit different to one of these world-class names that sometimes gets linked. I know, obviously, people who want Kylian Mbappe, they want Erling Haaland, they want all of those players, but we know that that's not quite how Liverpool do things. It does tend to be someone who's a little bit different, maybe someone that you've not necessarily heard of before, or maybe they've played in a different country, not done that well, but Liverpool see something in them that other clubs don't. I don't think Coman falls into, well, he certainly doesn't fall into that category. And I think that, for me, is one that, if Liverpool were linked with a player more like that, we've seen the links with the player at Porto, Otavia. I think someone like that kind of makes more sense to me, just from looking at what Liverpool have done historically. It would kind of follow a similar sort of pattern, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned Otavia there. I think at the time that this podcast is released, he's got 1 day left on his release clause. So there might be something, if that's going to happen, it's going to have to happen very soon, I think. But no, I agree with you on that. I think spending upwards of 50-60 million on a squad player is something that City do, as opposed to Liverpool. And Liverpool maybe shopping perhaps just in that lower level this summer for someone that can come in for kind of 30-40 million and be an option, as we've seen with Jota last year. But just sticking on Coman for now, he's maybe unfairly built himself a bit of a reputation for an injury prone player. I know it's something, certainly in our group at work, it's the first thing that kind of popped up when we saw the reports yesterday. He's injured, and why would Liverpool spend that amount of money on someone that spends half the time on the bench, on the treatment table, especially given Liverpool's problems last season with injuries. But actually, when you dig into it, the last 3 years he's played between 30 and 40 games every season, and it's perhaps a touch unfair, that reputation.
Yeah, I think it is unfair. I think it kind of comes really because he's had 2 big injuries in his career. And in fact, you could almost call it one injury, because he had one injury, he came back and then did the same thing to the same ankle ligaments it was. So he's had 2 sort of sustained periods of time where he's missed the end of one season, the start of the next. And then I think that the second time it happened, it was all in the space of one season. But that's kind of what people are remembering. But of course, he's been a senior player for 6, 7, 8 seasons now. It's sort of a long enough period of time that even with that injury, he's still played a lot of matches for sort of the rest of that time. As you say, he's played between 30 and 40 games, closer to 40. He's played 39 last season, 38 the season before that. I mean, the injuries have sort of been there. There's been sort of 3-4 games each season that he's missed with little minor injuries. There's sort of COVID-related things that he missed a match for last season. But it is very small numbers. I mean, it's not one of those where, for example, Naby Keita has only put together 3 games in a row for Liverpool. Coman has put down, much longer spells without injuries. And I don't think it would necessarily be something that would put off Liverpool or put off any other potential suitors. I think if you actually look into it, it's nowhere near as bad as what people might think. So yeah, he tends to miss sort of between 4 and 8 games each season with injury. But I think, obviously that's not perfect. Liverpool have always tended to target players who've got perfect injury records. Mohamed Salah, for example, never, ever misses a match. Forget, 4, 5, 6 like Coman does. But I think if Liverpool were to go for him, particularly because, as we said before, he would be one to sort of come in and out of the team. He wouldn't necessarily just come in, replace Mane. It would be a case of sort of mixing things up and rotating. I think if you get, 38, 39, 40 games off him, as has been the case for 3 or 4 seasons now, I think you'd certainly take that, even at that sort of price tag. So yeah, I think he started 23 out of 34 for Bayern Munich in the league last season. I think he was missing for one Champions League match, but out of the 9 that he was fit for, he started in 7, came on in the other 2, I think. So it's not really as bad as you might think. And I think certainly if he does leave Bayern, I think there will be a queue of clubs interested just for the reasons we've gone through. I'm not convinced that Liverpool will necessarily be one of them, unless the price is ridiculously low. But the reports in Germany suggesting that that's probably not the case at the moment.
And just finally, Matt, for argument's sake, if the transfer did go through and we saw Coman doing not the Melwood lean, I guess it'd be the Kirby lean over the next few weeks, then where do you think he'd fit in Liverpool? I mean, you mentioned there you've still got the front three, and Mane's not really showing any signs of going anywhere. If you look at the Euros this summer, then Coman's only had one substitute appearance for France, whereas Jota's kind of built himself up to the level where he was a key figure for Portugal alongside Ronaldo in that team. So you could even argue that perhaps Jota would be ahead of Coman in the pecking order, even if he was to sign.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting one. I think Roberto Firmino over the next sort of season, 2 seasons, is going to kind of be phased out a little bit. But at the moment, I don't think it's necessarily time for that to be the case. I think, with obviously the Copa America out of the way, he'll have a little bit of a rest before pre-season. Hopefully he can get himself fully fit and firing ready for the new season and get himself back to those levels. For Sadio Mane, he'll have had the summer to rest and recuperate, and I think he'll be certainly better than what he was last season, even if he's not necessarily going to be back straight away to his absolute peak that we saw the season before last. But I think certainly those two you'd expect it to improve on last season. Mohamed Salah just has to do what Mohamed Salah does, and everyone will be absolutely fine with that. I just think it's one of those where Liverpool do have to add another player into that mix this summer. I think Harvey Elliott will get games, but I think Liverpool have to put one more in. Whether that's Coman or whether that's somebody else, I don't think it's necessarily a pecking order of you're the 5th choice, you're the 4th choice. I just think game by game, if you can mix it up, you can bring in a different option to play off the left. If you've got, for example, Jota on the left, Coman comes in, could play as a number 10. I think it's just the opportunity to be a bit more versatile, to maybe mix it up and go 4-2-3-1, maybe to have Salah through the middle, because that you've got Jota to go on the left and Mane to go on the right. Just something a little bit different I think Liverpool need. And Coman could do that, but I think there's a long list of players who are more likely for a variety of reasons, not least that cost.
Well, if anything does happen with Kingsley Coman or anybody else this summer, we'll bring you all the latest here on Blood Red. I've been Kai Delaney, joined by Matt Addison, and you've been listening to The Agenda. Until next time, bye for now.